So, how long do you think it'll be before Mr. Reeves or Dr. Reeves is pilloried by the fembots because he's not talking exclusively about women? He's bringing up some things about men and pointing out some statistics that are inconvenient in this world. Now, I don't know anything about Richard Reeves, but he apparently wrote a book, and it has to do with men being left behind in our current environment. And I think that's clear for many to see in many areas. Well, what about all the CEOs that are men? Most men are not CEOs. Well, what about all the politicians that are men? Most men are not politicians. Okay? You're trying to point out a difference. And you're right, there is a difference, but does it matter? Is it an exclusive female thing to not be in Congress? No. It's an exclusive people thing. Most people are not in positions of power. But listen to the fembots, they would think men are all powerful and oppressive and blah, blah, blah. You know. Aldwick is here. Michelle Guevara, welcome back. Sergeant Grinch, Ballistic Zero. All right. I'm going to try to run through this quick. It's only about 13 minutes, but I'll try to keep my yap a little bit shut. But as you know, you've got to banana once in a while or else you get a copyright. Go on.
Of boys and men, why the modern male is struggling, why that matters, and what to do about it.
I'm sure it matters because it's going to affect women. I think he does get down that rabbit hole in the third chapter of this, but let's go. You got to be better for women, man. Don't you know? God.
The overall picture is that on almost every measure, at almost every age, and in almost every advanced economy in the world, the girls are leaving the boys way behind, and the women leaving the men.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Reeves does get something a little bit wrong in this section, but we'll get to it.
What nobody expected was that girls and women wouldn't just catch up to boys and men in education, but would blow right past them and keep going.
Now, if you knew nothing about history, you might say to yourself that prior to the 60s revolution, women weren't even allowed to get educated at all. Which is nonsense, of course. He's talking more about college. But again, you got to really understand that even our friend here, Mr. Reeves, has got a little bit of propaganda. He's got a little bit of the Kool-Aid going on in his brain cells.
Everyone was very focused, quite rightly, on getting to gender equality, getting to gender parity. It's not that long ago where there was a huge gender gap the other way, and there was huge focus, correctly, in the 70s and 80s.
The 70s, Mr. Reeves. Let me explain why. Title IX was instituted, I think, in 1972. Which said that, you know, women should be afforded the same opportunities as men in sports and various things. It's good. Yeah, wonderful. Of course, it's been bastardized into Me Too on campus. But anyway, so that happened in 1972. By 1979, a mere 7 years later, women had reached parity in college. It was exactly split, 50-50, men and women split. 1979, sir. Just want to point that out.
To really promote women and girls in education. But the line just kept going, and nobody predicted that. Nobody was saying, what if gender inequality reemerges in just as big a way as now, in some cases bigger, but the other way around? And
because they don't care. Nobody gives a shit. Nobody. Mr. Reeves. And I'm glad you wrote this book to bring awareness to it. Everyone's aware. Anyone who's done even just a tiny scratch of the surface of the information knows women are 1.5 times now? 1.5 times the number of students in college than men. 60-40 split roughly. Prediction it's going to go to something like 70-30 by the end of the decade. That is not parity. That is not equality. See. So we did all these things to get more women into college, which is fine. That's good. Yeah, they have the opportunities. Great. But the job was done in 1979. You see, maybe my point is simply this. Once the ball starts rolling, it's never stopped. It's never over. We still have affirmative action in the United States for women only, and underrepresented minorities for sure. But women are the majority in this country. They have every right under the Constitution and more than men do. And yet the government still has special programs only for women. How does that make sense? If the goal was parity, we got there 45 years ago. So something's going on here, sir. Something is going on. But once that ball starts rolling, Mr. Reeves, the ball never stops. And we can look around and see it today in college and many other areas. I mean, you've noticed rarely do you hear the politicians, except Joe Biden, because he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about at this point. Oh, we need to get more women in education. Excuse me, what would be the number then? What would be the goal? Is it 90% women in college? So they rarely talk about that because they know what that looks like. And so instead they talk about, well, there just aren't enough women in engineering. Okay. But the corresponding there aren't enough men in elementary education never sees the light of day. Why is that? Go on.
To some extent, everyone's still trying to get their head around this new world where, at least in education, when you talk about gender inequality, you're pretty much always talking about the ways in which girls and women are ahead of boys and men. And that's happened in a very, very short period of human history.
45 years. Yeah. 45 years. And now that men are behind in the same position as women were in the early 1970s, is anyone saying anything? No.
So if you look at the US, for example, in the average school district in the US, girls are almost a grade level ahead of boys in English and have caught up in math. If we look at those with the highest GPA scores, the top 10%, 2/3 of those are girls. If we look at those at the bottom, 2/3 of those are boys. When it comes to going to college, there's a 10% gap in college enrollment, a similar size gap in completing college, conditional on enrolling. And the result of those trends is that the gender gap in getting a college degree is now wider than it was in 1972, but the other way around.
Now, part of the girls doing better in school can be explained by the revamping of the education system. When more girls came in, they kind of changed up how they were teaching. Now, I don't know this for sure because this happened after me. I was in middle school or something when all this happened. But what I've heard, and I don't have the research in front of me to put the link in the description, what I've heard is that the classroom environment has changed to be more favorable toward women because women and men learn differently. But again, we have the natural overcorrection that nobody talks about. It should be fair and balanced. Try to teach men and women differently, excuse me. Even perhaps have male and female only schools. Since we understand men and women learn differently about things. That would be one solution that would make a lot of sense to me. Then you wouldn't have to deal with all the other crap that comes with a mixed school. I think it's a good idea. Is anyone talking about that? No. As a matter of fact, the feminists are all about removing that sort of thing from prestigious schools in England, for example. Can't have that. Oh, no. That's discrimination. What about this learning? Oh, that's just because men aren't as clever, right?
So in 1972, when Title IX was passed to promote more gender equality in education, there was a 13 percentage point gap in favor of men getting college degrees.
13%.
Now there's a 15 percentage point gap in favor of women.
Actually, it's more like 20, but okay. All right.
Getting college degrees. Okay. So the gender inequality we see in college today is wider than it was 50 years ago. It's just the other way around.
Yep.
there's quite a fierce debate about the differences between male and female brains. And in adulthood, I think there's not much evidence that the brains are that different in ways that we should worry about. Or that
Well, talk to Rachel. What's her face? She thinks there's no difference whatsoever because she's a communist.
Particularly consequential. But where there's no real debate is in the timing of brain development. It is quite clear that girls' brains develop more quickly than boys' brains do.
Really? You mean with respect to education? Well, what if the curricula and the methods of teaching are female friendly? Could that be holding men back and boys in school? Is that a possibility? Is it? I wonder how it compares to before. Did men and boys and girls do about the same? Yeah.
And that the biggest difference seems to occur in adolescence. So what happens is in adolescence, we develop what neuroscientists call the prefrontal cortex.
Ooh.
The prefrontal cortex of our brain is sometimes known as the CEO of the brain. It's the bit of your brain that says you do homework rather than. It's the bit of your brain that says it is worth maintaining a high GPA because it will help you get to college, which might help you in the future. That bit of the brain develops considerably earlier in girls than in boys, between 1 and 2 years earlier.
Yeah. What doesn't develop, however, is when women go to college and they take shit degrees and then bitch when the pay is $2 an hour. So that part of the brain doesn't develop as soon as men's does. But go on.
Partly because girls go into puberty a bit earlier than boys, and that seems to trigger some of this development.
I see.
What that means is that if you have an education system that rewards the ability to turn in homework, stay on task, worry about your GPA, prepare for college and so on, then just structurally, that's going to put at an advantage the group whose brains have developed earlier in those particular areas. That turns on average to be girls. I think it's a great irony of women's progress that by taking the brakes off women's educational opportunities and aspirations, we've revealed the fact that the education system is slightly structured against boys and men.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Indeed. Again, we could compare the scores and whatever of kids before, say, the 1970s. Were they somewhat the same? Or maybe women in the 30s and 40s or whatever figured they were never going to go to college anyway, so why should I care about my good grades, et cetera, and so on? Who knows? Most men actually didn't go to college in the 30s and 40s either. See what I'm saying?
Because of these differences in the timing of brain development. But it took the women's movement to show that, because the natural advantages of women in education were impossible to see when women's aspirations were being capped by a sexist society.
A sexist, again, it's just just ridiculous to some degree. He's obviously got some fembot Kool-Aid running around.
Now that those caps have been largely removed, we can see that it's boys and men who are at a disadvantage in the education system.
True enough, yes. So go to single-sex schools then. I think that would be a really good idea.
At the risk of sounding boring, let's collect the data first so we know what we're dealing with here.
Okay.
I do think that we should be strongly encouraging boys to start school a year later than girls. I think that should become the default in many school districts because of the developmental gap that there is between boys and girls. Because boys' brains mature more slowly, then them starting school a year later would mean that they were developmentally closer to being peers with the girls in the classroom.
Or we could have classrooms for boys only and teach the way boys learn instead of the girl method. Why not? Why would that be such a horrible thing?
We need a lot more male teachers. It's striking that the teaching profession has become steadily more female over time. Only 24% of K-12 teachers now are male. That's down from 33% in the 80s. And fewer men are applying to teacher training year on year. And so we've seen this steady shift towards a close to an all-female environment.
Yeah, so wouldn't you think the government, those smart people that run the country, they might have some incentives they want to put in place to get more male teachers? No, they don't. By golly, they don't. But they have tons of incentives and special programs and scholarships and shit to get women into STEM. Why don't we have the same thing, getting more men into teaching or in whatever? I guess that's part of the problem, isn't it, Mr. Reeves?
Has all kinds of consequences for the ethos of the school, for the way we deal with different kinds of behavior among boys and girls, for example. And so we need a very serious and intentional effort to get more men into teaching. The third thing I would do in this world where I have significant power to dictate policies would be significantly more investment in vocational education and training. That is an area where we do seem to see better results for boys and men on average, and one that's woefully underinvested in the US. The US has really bet most of its dollars on a very academic, a very narrow route towards success, and less emphasis on vocational training. And that
You mean people who actually do something? They fix your electric grid. They design your electric, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I would think that'd be kind of important. But no.
has actually put boys and men at a disadvantage. So
what we need are more gender studies graduates. That's really what the country needs.
Apprenticeships, technical high schools are actually a really good way to help more boys and men.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember we had shop class. That was probably the funnest class, go in and do woodworking and welding and stuff. And eventually, this was, 1980-ish? They said, oh, there's no reason the girls can't be in there. So the girls came in. They had fun, too. And the men, we did the normal girl stuff, that was at the time home ec or something. We had a blast. It was great. It was fun.
I think one of the challenges with this debate is that if you're talking to women and men who are, say, at the top of the economic ladder, 4-year college degrees, decent incomes, they look around and they don't see some of these issues. But that's not the same for working class men. That's not the same for men lower down the economic ladder. So there's a danger that we're so busy, to borrow Sheryl Sandberg's phrase, so busy leaning in that we don't look down. The reality for men further down the ladder is very different.
The glass.
These roof sandwiches, now 4 for $10.
Yeah. Now I'm hungry. But not for Arby's. I should probably go to the grocery store. I need to get some food. And, beer mostly, but food, yeah. Fix electric motors, yeah. That's a good job. Get those things, get the brushes in there and fix them up, get the bearings. Oh, yeah. They hate the truth. Of course they do. Shop class. Well, I don't even know if that. I'm assuming that they still have shop class where you do woodworking and make furniture and stuff. That's what we did. That was fun. There was also another thing we did. They actually sent us 20 miles away to get actual, to get training at a vocational school. I was electronics. That was my thing. But I mean, there were men and women, girls and boys who went off and took 2 or 3 hours in the afternoon to go get this vocational training, electronics. You could do welding, car repair, nursing, whatever you wanted to do. It was a good deal. I thought that was wise. Now that I look back on it, it was very, very wise. Go on. All right.
The economic trends for men have turned downwards along 4 dimensions. One is wages. Most men today earn less than most men did in 1979. In employment, with a drop in labor force participation of 8 percentage points, which means 9 million men now of prime age are not working. We've seen a drop in occupational stature. And so there are now more men working in employment areas which are seen as lower status than they were in the past. And we've also seen a drop in the acquisition of skills, the kinds of skills and education that boys and men need. If boys don't get educated and men don't get skilled, they will struggle in the labor market. And across all of those domains, we've seen a downwards turn for men in the last 4 or 5 decades.
But I mean, the good part is that most of us now, we have the internet, right? There's millions of videos. How to fix a car, how to fix a stereo, how to fix your computer, how to do this, how to do it's all there. So that's a good positive thing in the internet. The problem is that there's probably not a lot of people that I'm going to go look on TikTok and watch the latest pink sauce. I mean, it's there. The educational opportunities just with the internet. I mean, you could probably get a college degree education, at least probably better, just by going to YouTube and looking up the videos, the stuff you're interested in, how to fix a car, etc. I mean, everybody should know that. And it seems like a lot of these kids nowadays, they don't even know how to change a damn tire on their car. But they do have a phone. And if they need to do it, they can look it up. Well, most of them don't. They'll just call AAA, Daddy, my tire's flat.
And so the way in which social class divides have opened up, economic inequality has widened, is really important to understand in the context of gender inequality. If we only focus on gender gaps, then we miss the fact that both men and women at the top have done increasingly well. But that's much less true of everybody else. And especially it's less true of those from lower income backgrounds, working class boys and men, and black boys and men. You see many of those trends are amplified. And so those boys and men are really at the sharpest end of many of the social and economic changes.
And when you are talking about inner city education, where there might be more minorities and poor kids, it should absolutely be trashed and start over again. Those kids are getting screwed. They're not getting a decent education. You can talk to the teachers' unions about that. Couldn't you?
On one hand, we have a huge and successful and laudable effort to get more women into STEM jobs, so science, technology, engineering, and math. On the other side, we have what I call HEAL jobs. So that's health, education, administration, and literacy, almost, if you like, the opposite side of the coin to STEM jobs. That's where a lot of the jobs are coming from. Health and education alone are huge and growing sectors in the US. And so by my estimates, for every one job we're going to create in STEM between now and 2030, we're going to create 3 in HEAL jobs. But those jobs are at least as gender segregated as STEM jobs, but in the other direction.
Yep, that's right.
And unlike STEM, becoming more so over time. So if you look at the HEAL sector, only 24% of the workers in those sectors are male.
It's an exact mirror image of engineering, roughly.
And that number is falling. And in particular sectors, we're seeing a really precipitous drop in the number of men. We have a drop in the number of male teachers. We have a very sharp drop in the number of male psychologists. That's dropped from 39% male to 29% male in the last decade alone. And among psychologists under the age of 30, only 5% are male. So we roll that forward, and we're going to see psychology becoming essentially almost an all-female profession.
It pretty much is already. Really. So what is the solution? Do we say, hey, wait a minute, we need to get more men into... Do you even understand what the outcry would be from the fembots and the left? I think you do, don't you?
So these jobs, which are both crucial, I think, for society and where it'd be very useful to have more diversity, are actually becoming more gender segregated. And so we have absolutely no effort to get more men into HEAL jobs, which is where I think the future lies and where we should be helping men to move.
And the government will not, because the feminists will not support it. The feminists will lose their shit. And I'm not exaggerating. You guys may have heard the story about the Australian veterinary college. This was a few years ago, where they determined that they weren't getting enough male applicants for, I believe it was large animal veterinary stuff or small animal. I can't remember, whatever. But there were far more women in it and men. And so they put a scholarship together that was male only, to get more men into this particular college. You can about imagine what the feminists did. They were in the streets protesting, signs, bitching, screaming, yelling, causing trouble until they repealed it. That's what happens. And that's what will happen if this is ever brought up in front of anyone of authority. Congress, what have you. Hey, we need to do this for men. Oh my God, there'd be protests, screaming, riots. That's where we're at.
One of the problems that we face is what I call in the book a dad deficit.
Yep.
And that can be seen in various different ways. So 1 in 4 fathers don't live with their children. If parents split up, They're much more likely to lose contact with fathers and with their mothers. And so 1 in 3 children, if their parents split up, don't see their father at all after a few years post the separation. So this fatherlessness is something that's very, very specific. And when 4 in 10 children are born outside marriage, and most children to less educated parents are born outside marriage.
4 in 10. 40% of children in the United States are born out of wedlock. 40%. What was that percentage back in, say, 1960? 5%. What about among African American women? 70% of children born to African American women are born out of wedlock. That number was 10% in 1960. Progress?
Then we have to reinvent what it means to be a father. Because right now, men are still being held to an old standard of what it meant to be a successful father in a world where that is neither possible for many of them or even desirable. Because what we've seen is as women have grown in economic power and economic independence, then of course they're going to choose to be with a man rather than being forced to, as in the old days.
Nobody forced women to be. Come on. Dude, you need some anti-feminist Kool-Aid, man. What you just said is bullshit. Nonsense.
This is probably the greatest liberation in human history, honestly, that women can now choose whether to be with a man or not. More than 2 out of 5 households in the US now, a woman is the main breadwinner.
Okay.
40% of American women earn more than the average man. These are huge economic changes and all for the good. But it does pose some really sharp
40% of women earn more than the average man. Interesting.
questions about what fathers are for. And until we escape the obsolete model of the breadwinner father, then we will continue to see more and more men being left out of family life. And the kicker is that boys in families that don't have a father presence suffer much more than girls. And so then what happens is that male disadvantage can become intergenerational, because if the fathers are struggling and therefore not really involved in their kids' lives, then the boys are the ones who suffer most. Who
are we gonna mention the elephant in the room, Mr. Reeves? Are we just gonna say men need to do certain things? Who is in charge of having the baby? Who is in charge of the divorce system? Are we going to name that person or people? Are we going to say maybe they have a little bit of a blame there? A little bit of responsibility? No, why would we do that? It's the men that are the problem, aren't we, Mr. Reeves?
will then go on to struggle themselves in education and the labor market. It's clear by now that marriage and social institutions and a sense of purpose matter to men. And so as we've seen these real challenges faced by men in education, work, and family, you're seeing some really difficult and troubling health consequences. And so the so-called deaths of despair from suicide, overdose, or alcohol, 3 times higher among men than among women.
Yep.
Suicide itself, 3 times higher among men and women, and rising very quickly, especially among middle-aged men and younger men.
Yeah.
So we can see these as symptoms, I think, of a broader malaise, which is what's troubling boys and men. And for men in particular, this sense of purpose is very important. I think it's a human universal that we need to be needed. There's a wonderful piece of work by an academic called Fiona Shand, who looked at the last words that men had used to describe themselves before committing suicide or attempting suicide. And the top of the list were worthless and useless. I think if we create a society in which so many men do feel like they're not needed, then it's no surprise that we see these deaths of despair. We see problems with opioids. Opioids are a much bigger problem for men than they are for women. And one of the great tragedies of opioid deaths is the death rates are higher in part because the users are on their own. And so in some ways, the opioid epidemic is a perfect illustration of a whole series of things we're talking about, which is a loss of role in the family, a loss of status in the labor market, turning to drugs and being isolated and withdrawn. And so in that example, I think you can see a symptom of this broader male malaise that we just need to take it more seriously. And we have a cultural responsibility as a society, men and women together, to help men and boys to adjust to this new world. Because right now, many of them are really struggling.
Get smarter, faster with videos from the world's biggest thinkers.
Big thing.
To learn even more.
Again, it's very disappointing to me. Very disappointing that Mr. Reeves did not point out that the other half of the equation is not there. Just not even consider. Maybe there's something that women are doing. Maybe they have some responsibility here. Certainly they do with respect to having out-of-wedlock kids. That's a complete female thing. The men have no say in that. It's disappointing. But at least he wrote a book and he's got some good ideas. But yeah, how can you look at a problem and not look at the whole thing? I don't understand that. I don't understand it. Ballistic Zero. Pop talked about, yeah. Yep, wage slave, yep. Yeah, well, I mean, at least the man he's given it a shot. Just like Warren Farrell and other men and women who have written books about, hey, we got a problem here. Why is no one paying attention? Wake up. We got half society falling to the wayside. Nobody cares. Government doesn't care, or else they'd have all these scholarships and they'd do some stuff. People in the government would say, whoa. We got an oversupply of women in college. Sorry, we're taking away affirmative action. No more female. No. Nope. For 45 years, that has been the case, and nobody fucking cares. What are we going to do to get more men into the heel? Nothing. What are we going to do to get more women in STEM? Everything. And it still doesn't work. A lot of women don't want to do engineering. I have a theory. Not that it's hard or not that it's, they can handle it. They got the brain power for it. There aren't a lot of good quality men there. Do you know what I'm saying? Engineers are perceived to be geeks and nerds and in women's eyes, losers. Do you get my point? I think maybe I'm onto something. Yeah. Let's see here. Millennials, we trained in school not to state observations, but dumbed down at the same time. I don't know if his solution, excuse me, I don't know if his solution is, start boys later, a year later in school. I mean, I suppose you could. But I think separate classrooms for boys and girls would probably go a long way to getting at least this part of it fixed. Just have all boys and all girls. Why is that such a big deal? Isn't that what the current fembots want anyway? They want all these male spaces or female spaces, and men are icky. Men are all XYZ and rapa and all that other stuff. Well, that would solve that problem too now, wouldn't it? But I think the biggest problem is our school systems are hosed. It's bureaucratic bullshit. It's the government getting big kickbacks from unions who run the schools. They're never going to touch that big old pot of money there. They're never going to say, well, we got to do it for the kids. No. Math is hard, says who? 346. Well, it is, yeah. But I mean, it's not that women are incapable of doing it. Absolutely not. They could do it. It's just there has to be a need, I suppose, a necessity. I want to do that, and they can do it without question. Botched, it says we're a disposable resource. Yep. Currently, it seems like men are only good for one thing: paying taxes and giving money to the government to redistribute to women. And, Ukraine, send them a few billion more. Riggs, what did he say? Forever, same here, annoy people. Well, yeah, we know that. I'd annoy people because I'm doing something I want to know. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that was always a big question for me, too. Why the hell, what do I have to take trig for? The hell am I ever going to use that? I'm not going to do any of that shit. Of course you do. It's very, very fundamental to doing calculus and various things. So, yeah. But yeah, at the time, you're like, what the hell do I got to do this for? Why do I have to do these matrix equations? What am I ever going to use those for? Oh, you do. Oh, you do. I mean, I know that's engineering specific, but if you guys are engineers or have done any of that stuff, look who's in the building. It's Barb Vanderwister Hoffenheimer, my ginger friend, Geeks and Losers. Then they aren't smart women if they think that way. Well, I would agree. Maybe they just can't handle it. Engineers are oftentimes socially awkward. True. Women are social creatures. That's true. I'm not socially awkward, though, Barb. Well, you guys might not know, but me and Barb worked on the radio together a long time ago. She's a great woman. She's lovely. But yeah, a lot of times engineers tend to be socially awkward, and it's not easy for men to deal with these guys either. You know what I'm talking about. These guys go in a room, they could code for 15 hours and not talk to anybody. They'll be happy. Or they'll do this and they don't have to have any interaction with people. A lot of these guys prefer it that way. It's just, let me code. I'm fine. So I don't want to go to your happy hour after work or have lunch. I just want to do my thing. Yeah. So, but I don't know about that, Barb, if that's a reason or the reason or a reason, might be. But I know when I walk around, where I work, I walk around, there's hardly any women. Really. And the company has been doing a lot of recruiting, trying to get more women, et cetera, and stuff like that. What I've noticed in my industry, in engineering, stuff like that, the women that do come in as engineers get to be managers, that they just kind of progress into that because it seems to be a better fit and they like it. Program managers, financial managers, just personnel managers. That's kind of where they arrive eventually. And that's fine. We need, everybody. So, but yeah, as just a regular grind out the equations and simulate crap and build things, engineering females, I've known very few. One I used to work with, she's out in Portland now. There's been a couple others, but typically they tend to migrate toward the program management side of things. Because engineering, it is kind of geeky shit, Well, hey, let's get excited about doing the simulation. Yeah, it's. I like it, but others might not. Wait, where did you go? Leo Kuhn. Engineers talk to other engineers. There you go. There you go. It's like, hey, what is I'm using, what's the new, it's not new, cafe or whatever it's called. Programming like, hey, do you use a semicolon or is it a colon? Or is it a colon, then a period and a slash? How do I call that variable up? Yeah, that's real exciting talk. Yeah, who says, let me work and leave me alone? Yeah. Yep, just let me do my job. I'm fine. When I was in radio, if Barb's still here, she can answer this. Yes. Yes, there is a lot of, and there's a reason for that. Because the federal government mandates that. So you have to have 50% male, 50% female, and you have to reflect the racial composition of where your license is located. So if you live in a mostly African-American area, you have to have more African-Americans compared to white people. And not only do you have to do that, when you're hiring, you have to show that you went and tried to recruit, different, folks of minority, whatever. But no, yeah, women there's all kinds of women in radio. Absolutely. A lot of them tend to be in sales, though. Yeah, I know, FCC stuff. A lot of them tend to go in sales. They do a pretty good job at sales. They make a ton of money. As for on air, yeah, there's usually, well, you know where I work, Barb. There was that one station that was mostly male, but that other one, that was, yeah, we had men in the morning, a midday woman, afternoon guy, and the evening kind of varied. Could have been a female or male. It's hard to say. But yeah, there is an FCC mandate that you must do that. Joshua is in the building. I guess when males have period. Oh, you're so bad. How could you say that? Yeah. Let's see here. Our man, Joshua Tidwell, says, I was a night weekend supervisor 6 months out of school, and it was a disaster when I took it over. I left it with well-oiled machines since go back to chaos. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. So, men have problems. No one cares. All right. It is 1:07. Time for my second lunch. You guys take care. Have a good one. Bye.